This video was made possible by viewers supporting through Patreon and YouTube memberships, and by the game Starsector. More about this personal favorite after the video.
Sorry for the delay. For those who've actually followed me, my name's Nigel. I'm 50-something, at the best guess. I used to be a sailor.
On October 19th, 2018, the channel Telephonet uploaded a video to YouTube titled 1 + 1 = 1 the video, alien emoji. The top line of the description declared in all capital letters that this video was, quote, possibly the most important video you've ever seen. It opens with Nigel attempting to establish himself as the real Nigel, apparently to ward off imposters either current or potential. To do so, he presents 2 picture frames as evidence, as well as a multimeter, a device used to measure electrical current, claiming that it appears in a long-lost video with him. However, neither of the picture frames is legible, and there is no way to check whether or not the multimeter appeared with him in said missing video. Satisfied that he has rebuffed any skeptics and preempted any imposters, he informs his viewers that the information that follows has caused the death of at least one person, wrongly declared an accident, and establishes the framing device for his nearly hour-long lecture. He asserts the existence of a missing video in which he confronts, quote, a group of very, very high-level people, and begins recounting what he told them in this video many years ago. Here, he proudly proclaims his thesis, that 1 + 1 = 1 because when you put 2 magnets together, you still only have 1 magnet, and that the same is true of an atom.
You have 1 + 1 = 1. And if you keep going all the way down to the atomic structure, right the way down to hydrogen, you end up with 1 neutron, 1 proton equals 1 atom. And they went, oh, what can you do with that? I said, absolutely loads. That's why I'm here. So not only did I trash the principle of Euclidean mathematics based on a magnet, I then went on to scare them.
Nigel also goes on to claim that people believe infinity to be 720 degrees because infinity is 2 circles next to one another, but he then denies this by drawing a magnetic field and explaining that there are actually 4 circles. Therefore, infinity is equal to 1440.
The problem with that is when you overlay it on the earthbound model of what you humans think you have. You think you've got that, which equals 720, and I've just proven there's that, which is actually 2 times that, or twice infinity. Oops. That did upset an awful lot of physicists and mathematicians in the room.
After this, Nigel describes how he believes that he has refuted Einstein's theory of mass-energy equivalence.
The closer you go, the more energy you get out. Bang, bomb, nuke, kill people, Hiroshima, that's the Americans. And Oppenheimer. Right, we'll stay there. We'll take the magnet. It's not moving. It equates to 0. Therefore, 0 times the constant equals 0. 0 times any number, 0. You know that. Well, if that was 0, there's no energy whatsoever, that magnet will fall on the floor. But it don't. So the magnet defies E = mc².
Much of the rest of Nigel's recounting follows a cycle. His audience of naval superiors asks him what he is doing, to which he responds by drawing on the whiteboard and explaining how he has refuted a foundational scientific theory or made some incredible revolutionary discovery. Next, the audience invariably reacts with a mixture of shock, horror, and anger, rebuking him by telling him that he cannot do what he is doing, either because it contradicts established science or because it will upset the balance of the world order. Nigel always gives a pithy response, directly insulting the intelligence of his superior officers and belittling their station. The audience then once again asks what Nigel is doing, and the cycle continues. Despite the gravity of Nigel's initial claims, he is far more interested in applying them to another discovery that he believes he has made: infinite energy. Declaring that a magnet is creating energy by holding onto a whiteboard against the force of gravity, he identifies this as an example of cold fusion, because cold fusion is, as he puts it,
how to get energy at room temperature without doing anything. Oh, you can't actually get, yeah, it's impossible. And I went, cold fusion. There's energy holding that on the board. It's cold, it's at room temperature. You're getting more out than you're putting in. You're not putting any in it, and there's energy because it's held in there and it's defying gravity. It's cold fusion. And they're going, I don't understand that. Well, you're the one with all the degrees and the A levels and you're the physicists and the mathematicians, and you can't even work that out. It doesn't make you very clever, does it? It just makes you very, very stupid.
Notably, Nigel's definition of cold fusion does not comport with the generally held definition.
My name is Kyle Hill. I'm a professional science educator in Los Angeles, California. I've been doing this for about 12 or 13 years now. I've won a couple of awards doing this, and I actually started my career looking into pseudoscientific inquiry. So cold fusion, it's unfortunately named because it has nothing to do with being cold for humans. Cold fusion is defined in relation to hot fusion. Hot fusion is what happens in fusion reactors when they're demonstrated. It's what happens in stars, like the sun in the sky. And that fusion happens at hundreds of millions of degrees. And so cold fusion is a lot colder than hundreds of millions of degrees, like he's saying correctly, at room temperature. Now, when he says do nothing, that is not true. You still have to fuse atoms together. And you still have to force those atoms together in some sort of way. Does he know what fusion is? Yeah, there's no fusion happening. Or is he just using it? Is he just using the term to mean free energy? Because when he puts that magnet on the board, there is energy there. There's gravitational potential energy. There's the interaction between the magnetic field and the material of the board. If he understood thermodynamics enough, you would know that even if you were creating an energetic environment, if you can't get any energy out of the system by doing what you're doing, it doesn't matter. The ability to do work is in a physical system is what, the real power source is.
Working from these assumptions, Nigel explained a method of chaining magnets together in order to produce a continuous, limitless source of power, describing the mechanics through more convoluted mathematics and geometry, and extrapolating his conclusions out into other fields, including the claim that ionized water carried with it immense health benefits.
As the water went across it, it would spin. And it would spin with inside a magnetic field, which is the inverse of the lens effect. And you would ionize the water. And when you ionize water and you drink it, it kills cancer. Shit, says the medic, don't let the world know that you can fix cancer. It means the pharmaceutical industry's screwed. Well, it's not my job. I'm here to help humans, I'm not here to fucking destroy them. That's what money does.
Among many other claims, he declared that magnetic fields are a double helix, and therefore they are the DNA of the universe because they have been around for a very long time. However, despite these groundbreaking assertions, he alleged that all of the work he had done was stolen by the Navy in a raid in order to suppress it.
So they changed the laws of the Navy. And they said that you work for us 24 hours, and they demanded all my work. They come and raided my house, they stole all my magnets, all my paperwork, they took the fucking lot. Sorry for swearing, but that's what the Royal Navy does.
Beyond his scientific assertions, Nigel saw fit to share some more personal details of his life. Early on, he implied that he had historically had financial difficulty.
Me, like all of you lot, I've got a bank account. Me, like all of you lot, on occasions have gone in the red, which is a minus.
He also made his disdain for religion known.
Can't show you God, but you believe that. I've showed it you here, so why don't you believe it? Check your own moral compass. Seeing is believing. Believing a lie is foolish.
As the video nears its end, Nigel reveals several notable details about himself, including that he had his child taken away from him and that he is now unemployed, reliant upon whom he calls charity people to sustain himself, though he leaves the nature of this charity unspecified.
Now, the Royal Navy have done their absolute best to destroy me. They tried to send me mad. They sent me to the most inhospitable places. They faked war. They went as far as removing my child from me. So this video is a personal attack and retaliation against the Crown of England. And I'm a goddamn Englishman. I am the perfect English gentleman. And the Royal Navy, in their pirating, scumbag attitude, committed treason, not only against UK, but against every goddamn man and woman on this planet, by hiding that video for the last 37 years. They have made you pay. They have made you suffer for 37 years. Because I don't have a job, because the Navy told everybody never to employ me. I have charity people help me out.
Nigel's absurd claims and bombastic delivery attracted the attention of enthusiasts online interested in the concept of over-unity, a term referring to a system, usually a man-made device, that can create more energy than is put into it. The most common example of this is a perpetual motion machine, at which there have been numerous attempts throughout history. Years later, this video would find an audience among a different subculture, the debunkers, who would watch and comment on the ways that Nigel's explanations either misunderstood or contradicted modern science, often ridiculing him as they did so, while some of the more incredulous viewers left comments wondering whether or not he truly believed in the concepts he was espousing. What few could have expected, however, was that Nigel would so inspire this former community that he would allegedly raise over $150,000 from them to further his research, and those who believed in him would go on to repeat his experiments that seemed to prove the impossible. What fewer knew, however, was that this was not Nigel's first time attracting the attention of internet users. 5.5 years prior, Nigel had begun a fight for a much different and more personal cause. On March 11, 2013, a video was released on a YouTube channel then known as Eddie the Cat 7, titled "NATO Chief Security Consultant, His Daughter Snatched by the UK Government." Linked in the description was a template-made website called Saving, whose homepage read, quote, "Welcome to our website. The British government has been child snatching in collusion with social services in flagrant breach of international law. Nigel Cooper, who used to be chief consultant for NATO security, has had his daughter stolen, and he's naming the names and tracking the digital signatures. Justices Moyland and Headley have caused the UK government to breach the Hague Convention, Lisbon Treaty, Maastricht Convention, Amsterdam Treaty, Paris Accord, London Treaty, Magna Carta." End quote. Beneath this declaration was a link to the aforementioned video, released contemporaneously, in which Nigel sits on a couch with a stack of papers that he identifies as a royal decree from the King of Belgium.
My name is Mr. Nigel Cooper. I'm the quintessential English gentleman. You may want to know why that I've chosen to have a video made in Holland rather than the UK. I can never return to the UK. The UK has put me into exile for 10 years. You may want to know why.
He introduces himself as having been the principal network security consultant for NATO and describes the process by which he legally gained custody of his infant daughter from her mother, Gail, whom Nigel decries as a drunk and drug addict. He explains that Gail managed to convince him that she had recovered from her addictions, which he claims was a lie, and talked her way into living with them again in Belgium. He then details the process by which Gail used bureaucratic trickery 3 years later to return to the UK with their child and his own attempts at using international law in order to reclaim his daughter, to no avail. While the Belgian courts sided with Nigel, ruling against Gail in absentia and supporting Nigel's claims, the UK courts refused to honor the ruling and made their own conclusions. Throughout this description, Nigel continually reaffirms his unassailable virtue and Gail's moral bankruptcy, but he also details numerous bureaucratic setbacks. Much more than merely sharing his experience, he intersperses the 30-minute-long video with declarations that the UK has been kidnapping and selling children for profit and accusing each bureaucrat he's worked with of taking part in the conspiracy, invoking national and international treaties being violated, including the Magna Carta and the Hague Convention. However, despite his zeal, sometimes his descriptions of events leave significant ambiguity, and he fails to produce any evidence of the conspiracy he touts, despite describing recordings and electronic records.
Estelle Lou, if you search at the present time, is an active web page in Sunderland. 43,000% profit as a company stealing children. Your CVs are fake. Your master's degree is a fake. Your bachelor's degree is a fake. From the date that you said you were born, through a standard education and the time it takes to get a degree, you're a liar, you're a fake, you're a fraud.
What's more, despite declaring himself the perfect English gentleman and carrying a UK passport, he claims that he is completely Belgian, and that his time in the Royal Navy was in service to humanity rather than the UK.
I don't belong to the UK. I never have and I never will. I served 22.5 years in the Royal Navy for the simple reason for the freedom of the people of this planet, not for you to steal my daughter. I earned 13 medals in the name of my Queen for freedom and the protection of the children and citizens of the UK and Europe. I moved to NATO and served for 7 years as the principal consultant protecting children wherever they are in the world under the hospice of NATO, and you stole my daughter. Stop right there, boys and girls. I'm not British. I'm Belgian. I am an habitual resident of Belgium.
He also makes a notable objection to a reason that a judge gave to prevent him from taking his daughter back to Belgium.
He further went on to say, because of my age. I beg your pardon, Justice Moylan. What gives you the right to turn around and tell me or any person on this planet how old they can be when they choose to start a family?
What's more, he declared that he could use the order he received from the Belgian courts and the King of Belgium to dismantle the entire government of the United Kingdom.
And I will use this judgment to bring down the UK, to free every single child in the UK that you've stolen. This was done for a reason.
This is your silver bullet. I want this in every media, every TV station, because the UK has put an IP gag on the electronic borders of the UK in my name. I can't publish anything in the UK. They don't like me because I hold this judgment.
While Nigel's demands would go ignored by mainstream outlets, a few independent news organizations and vocal conspiracy bloggers wrote about Nigel's video over the following few days. These writers all sourced the same single video of Nigel, uncritically repeating his claims and calling for his story to be amplified by their readers. Many of those engaging with Nigel used their blog post or article to include other interests, though all related to government abuse or overreach in some way. Notably, the UK column offered him an hour and 10-minute long interview 2 weeks after his video was published, where he repeated the same talking points, though he also made a handful of new claims, including that in the intervening weeks he had been labeled an international terrorist, that the UK military had attempted unsuccessfully to arrest him, that they had broken down the door at his home, and that he had received death threats through phone calls, emails, and blog posts. He stated that he was advised to move out of the country, which he claimed to have done. He also claimed that he was being actively tracked by both the Security Service and the Secret Intelligence Service of the United Kingdom, also known as MI5 and MI6 respectively. While he announced that he was able to provide evidence to anyone who asked for it, no publicly accessible records of this evidence appear to survive. At first, the response seemed to have been extremely pleasing to Nigel. He began writing thousands of words in the comments of some of the blogs sharing his story, stating that he was publishing these writings in multiple locations to ensure their survival into the future. Much of these were Nigel reiterating his certainty in his legal correctness and attacking those who he believed to be in violation of his interpretation of the law. He claimed to be receiving over 1,000 emails per day from similarly beleaguered families, and an online petition that he shared received 268 signatures. As the months passed, talk of Nigel quickly diminished, though he himself was apparently still vocal in the now-lost Facebook group he made for his cause. In April, 1 month after his video with Eddie the Cat 7, Nigel posted a copy of a letter that he claims he sent to Queen Elizabeth II, in which he asks her why she, quote, authorized the officers of your courts to break the law. Your family courts have tried everything possible to stop me enforcing my judgment. I have been lied to, and I have had my civil rights abused against my right as laid down in the Magna Carta. End quote. Beyond this, he made several new claims, including that he was injected with anthrax during his time in the Royal Navy. Contradicting his video, he admits that he indeed is British, though he expresses his dismay at this fact and states that he wishes to have his United Kingdom passport revoked. However, while many fringe bloggers briefly took up the cause of Nigel, not all of them were supportive. One of the conspiracy bloggers in this social circle was Sharon Ann Zaki, a New World Order and Freemason enthusiast, and after listening to Nigel's interviews and videos and reading his posts, she had come to a profoundly different conclusion. In a 119-page document, she makes clear her belief that, rather than being a father fighting for custody of his child, Nigel was actually a bad actor working with the New World Order and the Freemasons in order to discredit bloggers like herself by making them appear mad. Quote, truthers who overdo it do not do the anti-NWO army any favors, as we can all be dismissed as crazy conspiracy theorists by the people we seek to expose. That, of course, is the intention of the controlled opposition agents. End quote. She continually points out what she believes to be inconsistencies in Nigel's story and frequently accuses him of outright lying while continually offering evidence that, according to her, supports her belief that Nigel is doubtlessly a part of the Freemason cabal. Alongside criticizing perceived inconsistencies in his story, she references another video from Nigel, also posted to the Eddie the Cat 7 YouTube channel that has since been made private, titled Nigel Cooper's Public Statement, published on April 3, 2013. Allegedly, this video was a statement to be presented to a UK judge as part of the attempt to reclaim his daughter. While her summary is far from comprehensive, Sharon does share several notable details from this statement. According to her, late into the video, Nigel claims that Gail kicked him out of the house in January of 2011 for an unspecified amount of time, which may have been related to a violent incident. Quote, "At 1:37, something like a bit of truth emerges. Cooper admits to being, a bit, violent towards Gail after she threatened that he will never see again. He accuses Gail of making absurd and dreadful allegations, that he's sexually perverted, a liar, violent." End quote. Nigel also, according to Sharon, was, quote, "on mind-numbing antipsychotic drugs as a result of an accident. This isn't mentioned anywhere else. He says for the next 6 weeks he's all alone and he did nothing. No work, no socialization. He says he meets with an old friend and cries on her shoulder. She asks him if he's big enough to fight back. Oh God, someone pass me a puke bucket." Throughout the video, he cries crocodile tears and he's constantly banging on about how vile Gail is, that she's constantly drunk, on drugs, violent, that she spends all his money, is always lying to him, that she's had too many affairs. Strange that he didn't videotape some hard evidence of this. This evil woman lets regularly phone her father and Skype chat with him, though. He says he was a coward and blackmailed by porn pickies that Gail took of him. Yeah, right. End quote. Sharon also describes the state in which Nigel found his daughter when she visited him for Christmas in December, including numerous obvious health problems and inappropriate dress, though details are left vague. However, Sharon went farther than simply analyzing what evidence already existed. Testing Nigel's willingness to share evidence and the inconsistencies she believed she had found, she emailed him in February of 2014 with demands for more information. This entire exchange would later be published in the document, alongside many other emails that she sent to other people Nigel had named. Her first email opened with a request for Nigel to read a post that she had made on her blog and a claim that the people promoting Nigel's story, quote, "have been proven to be lying shills. This means that your name is tarred by association. All of the things you accuse Gail and the UK of, I accuse you of. The truth about you is now published and will stand until you prove your story is true." End quote. She explains that she is attempting to purge the anti-NWO movement of traitors and implores him to, quote, "find Jesus and ask for the courage to do what is right." Remarkably, Nigel answered the same day, though he clearly had not read Sharon's email in full or very carefully. He stated that all electronic evidence was thoroughly encrypted and that he would only allow anyone to see it if they brought an officer with a camera to ensure the evidence's safety. In lieu of telling her how she can go about getting this evidence or supplying anything of substance, he attempts to placate her by asking why he would lie when he has sworn under oath. He also implored her to write to the Belgian judge who oversaw his case for any documents relating to it. The only things with which he directly supplied her were documents that he appears to have already made public. Nigel's response only incensed Sharon, who doubled down on her attacks. Beyond finding further evidence that Nigel was a Freemason, she also took frustration with the few documents that Nigel was willing to share. Quote, "There is nothing new there, no proof of anything, just endless pages of more of your self-righteous, self-aggrandizement, OTT repetitious sensationalism." This began an aggressive back and forth in which Nigel threatens Sharon legally for harassment and slander, though he couldn't refrain from continuing to respond to her attacks. In fact, after Sharon stopped emailing Nigel, he would send another email nearly a year and a half later to ridicule the document she had compiled. Quote, Zachy, I've reread your crock of shit that you wrote. Lots of negative questions to question you know fuck all about. Yes, publish this too. It will show how fucking dumb you are." End quote. However, in this exchange, Nigel shares that in the intervening months, he had renounced his cooperation with some of the bloggers who had helped amplify his story, though why he had done so appears to be lost. In the face of waning support and interest, Nigel's public online efforts to reclaim his daughter would diminish. Though it's unclear how long Nigel continued providing updates, if he did at all, a small amount of clarity would come from a project carried out by a number of experts in international law from the University of Aberdeen. This project was extremely focused, studying cases where Article 13 of the Hague Child Abduction Convention of 1980 was used to refuse the return of children across borders of European countries, and among those cases was Nigel's. Their summary would help clarify many elements of the case that had remained unclear from Nigel's surviving testimony. Citing the ruling of the Belgian courts, they confirmed Nigel's claim that his wife, Gail, had used bureaucratic trickery to leave Belgium with their daughter. Specifically, she had used an old document from Paul Cooper, the father of another of Gail's children, to convince the Belgian authorities that she had permission to leave with a different of her children, namely, the child she had with Nigel, in a deliberate obfuscation. They further reaffirmed the claims about Gail's alcohol and drug abuse, though they also mentioned that Nigel had been cited as having both, quote, psychiatric and physical health issues. However, the project also was able to provide further information. Believing that his daughter was receiving inadequate care, he remotely began proceedings in early 2012 to have her removed from Gail's care, and as a temporary measure, the courts moved her to her grandparents' house. In order to continue the proceedings, Nigel appeared in the English courts, but this proved to be a tremendous mistake. The judge who had first ruled against Nigel interpreted his appearance in an English court to be deference to the UK judgment over the Belgian judgment, practically destroying any chance that he would ever have to reclaim his daughter. Nigel desperately requested to have his applications for residence and contact with his daughter revoked so as to undo this ruling, but his request was denied. While they remained reserved in their assessment, the authors of the document offered clear sympathy for Nigel in the closing paragraph of one of the sections dedicated to his case. Quote, Mr. Cooper may have accepted the jurisdiction of the English court, but this case highlights the difficulties that are faced by litigants in this complicated system. Many applicants are not informed of the Article 11 6-8 Brussels 2A procedure. They might not be given the correct legal advice, and they might not necessarily qualify for legal aid, as it is no longer automatic, so they are in a difficult position. This is particularly the case where one wrong move, such as participating in proceedings, immediately removes one of their remedies. It is also problematic that all the English decisions focus on the fact that Mr. Cooper consented to the removal when it is clear from the Belgian decisions that this consent was deliberately forged by the mother. End quote. With diminishing allies and practically no hope of any legal recourse, Nigel would apparently fall more and more silent as the months passed, with little record of his posting anywhere remaining, but this would be far from the last time that the internet would hear from Nigel Cooper. After his struggle with the courts, a significant gap appears in Nigel's online activity. It's unclear how active he was on Facebook, but there are suggestions that he had been posting regularly on LinkedIn, and he claims to have had 4 or 5 different accounts banned by the website's moderation team, though precisely why was left unspecified. At one point, he also directed a commenter to a post he made on Google+, a now defunct social media service. While most of the articles that Nigel published to LinkedIn were not preserved, his last profile was. Under the experience section, he wrote that he was a professional entrepreneur and that he was a principal consultant for NATO. The third entry was simply the abbreviation for doctor with the description, "Oh, so many places." For education, he claimed that he received a PhD in physics and magnetology from the Open University, a higher education institution in the UK. However, given that his profile listed him as beginning his study there in 1973, it's likely that this was a cheeky way of declaring that he was an autodidact. The description stated that he, quote, saw the future. Under projects, he declared that he had made cold fusion and that, quote, it's free energy for everyone. He He also claimed to have a patent for cold fusion, whose other inventors were listed as me, myself, and humanity. His other patent was for something he called perpetual energy transfer. Under organizations, he simply wrote, "Not one that you would recognize, oh yes." The posts on his page varied widely, with a mixture of personal and professional comments. One post read, quote, "Happy birthday to me. What a shit life I lead, surrounding by the idiots of mankind who can't see further than the money in their pocket. I hope you enjoy your day." End quote. During this time, either in late 2015 or 2016, Nigel would take on the moniker for which he would be known, Nigel Cheese. Why he chose this name appears to be lost. He would attempt to share videos of some of his inventions and scientific ideas through YouTube, including a device he called an electromagnetic intensifier, or EMI, which consisted of a wire running through a tube with magnets surrounding it, which he claimed could increase the speed of ions passing through the wire. This was attached to an aluminum antenna, which he claimed could capture the free ions in the atmosphere. He tried to show the efficacy of this technology by filming a pot balanced on top of an electromagnetic intensifier turned on its end. Inside of the pot was water with a tablespoon of salt mixed into it, a wire attached to the earth-ground connection of a nearby outlet, and a thermometer. He declared that, through a process he called magnetic induction, the EMI was gradually bringing the temperature of the water up to boiling. However, this declaration was directly contradicted by the thermometer, which he proudly showed measuring room temperature. This fact did not concern Nigel. He believed that he had discovered the secrets to infinite energy, he had the evidence from his multimeter and his salt water, and now he was set on making it a reality.
To any person who's watching this, all I need is a little bit of money, a little few people with a gift to come and help me make free power for all of mankind. I'm not really interested in the oil companies. I'm not interested in the banks. I'm not interested in the governments or the war machines. I'm interested in people and our rights of every single goddamn one of us to have what's rightfully ours. That's the planet Earth for free forever. And if this electric here is free, there's nothing in it. It's only a bit of aluminium, a couple of bits of wire, glued together with some magnets, and it's banging out free electricity. Now that free electricity you see there will run from now until the end of goddamn time. There's more power being generated here on this table than every single nuclear device that's ever been exploded in the history of man. That proves the only thing Mr. Einstein done, as E equals MC squared, was kill people.
It's not free energy. It's maybe free in that you're not paying for it. I'm UO's Lab. I am now a YouTuber who creates engineering and DIY videos, but I have a background in electrical and computer engineering, and I worked in R&D for around 8 years or so. You can pull a positive voltage off of an antenna just due to the fact that there's radio waves everywhere. If you're near like an AM tower or something, you can like pull an arc off of an antenna, which is pretty significant. Because it's not free, right? It's used. It's completing a circuit. It's just that someone else would be paying for it. So it's free in the monetary sense.
The ways in which he used his multimeter were also questionable.
Oh, he's abusing the hell out of that multimeter. He's using it in the most unprecedented of ways. Multimeters will just misread voltage potentials when you're reading it from the AC setting. You know, you'll pick up noise and stuff in the air that shows it wrong. And he literally has it connected to an antenna, so he's really going to be picking up noise. Why does he keep saying, he loves showing you something and saying, look, it's doing this when it's not doing that in what he's showing you. Because he loves holding it, look, it's oscillating and it's just a static field. Static magnets around something aren't going to induce any current in it. If they moved, it would.
While many of Nigel's activities appear to have gone unrecorded, some interested in him archived a portion of his writings, which largely consisted of papers discussing his scientific ideas and experiments whose writing usually included pejorative rhetoric towards established institutions. For example, when discussing how he believed that he could retrieve infinite energy from magnets, he wrote, quote, "You will ask, how is this possible? And I will do my best to try to help you all understand. However, to understand, you have to forget a lot of the crap that the so-called smart people have been saying is so right for so long." End quote. He occasionally took the time to directly insult Albert Einstein and his ideas while suggesting that he was purposefully trying to hide the scientific knowledge that would lead to infinite energy. Quote, "My companion Bertie was only partly right. Yes, he located E and M and C, but failed to place them in the correct order. Or did he do it, did not want humanity to know the truth." End quote. Much of his writing was focused on generating energy through the use of stationary magnets, using his self-described specialization in EM and RF technologies during his time in the Royal Navy, though his flair for the dramatic would always be apparent. Notably, he denied that his work was in any way over Unity. Rather, he explained that this was simply gathering energy that had thus far gone untapped by human technology. As time passed, however, he would begin to shift his focus to new projects. In his paper, The Value of Nothing, he writes, quote, "Many years ago, I set out to fix the short list of problems mentioned above: pain, suffering, and poverty. It was my goal in life to give something to humanity that would stop the pain, stop the suffering, and end all poverty globally. For many years, in fact 36 fuckers in total, I spent building a device known as the quantum battery. It is one of 15 new technologies that I offer to humanity. The quantum battery does what it says it does. It makes free electricity. Unlike a conventional battery, one that depletes itself over time, the quantum battery can never be depleted and can never run flat. Why? The quantum battery draws its power from the 0 point of all energy. You know, the smallest possible point between two zeros? To try and understand what the hell is going on, it's like trying to shoot an arrow through the eye of a needle while riding a horse backwards with one eye closed. Not impossible, just a little tricky." End quote. These papers would often have diagrams and long descriptions using technical-sounding words, though many of these words would be improperly deployed, and many of his assumptions would be misunderstood simplifications of scientific principles. He opens his paper, Time Dilation Against That of F equals 1 over T times 3 times 10 to the power of 8 meters per second, by writing, quote, "Albert Einstein defined and stipulated the conditions of the space-time constant, a conjuncture that cannot exist, that of space and time being part of the same constant, given the fact that a constant forms a singularity of 1 and not of 1 plus 1. That is an accumulation, thus wrong." End quote. He also seemed to have begun working with others, at least temporarily, as he appears as a co-signee of a paper asserting the possibility of infinite energy and its delivery wirelessly. The paper declared that it would be illegal to, quote, "stake a claim on this invention." By 2017, Nigel's frustrations were reaching their height. He believed that he had discovered infinite energy and proven it to the world, but nobody with the necessary capabilities was willing to make his dream a reality. In the comments to one of his posts, he added a postscript which reads in part, quote, "Yes, I've built it. It is available today. The know-how, the drawings, the IPR, and patent. I am just waiting for a genuine investor who is not going to rip me off. The choice is, someone shows me genuine honesty, or the whole wood will continue to pay through the noise for something that is for free. Now, if anyone out there is La La Land, the so-called real world, wants this to happen for real, then all that person to do is make contact with me." End quote. And indeed, someone would make contact with him soon, promising to finally make Nigel's dreams of infinite energy a reality by providing the funding that he so desperately desired. In early 2018, a group going by GAEA Research launched a website touting that, quote, "You're the catalyst, GAEA is your vehicle, bringing zero-point energy to the world," and promising unlimited, unmetered energy. Their declaration read in all capital letters that they were, quote, "the world's first infinite energy incubator. GAEA Research has created a pathway for the benevolent use of advanced technologies to help make our world a better place for all humanity." End quote. The remainder of the page repeated common conspiracy claims, including one popular in over-Unity groups which states that Nikola Tesla had discovered infinite energy a century ago, and that world governments had forcibly suppressed the knowledge and would further suppress anyone who rediscovered this technology or tried to patent it. In order to work around this perceived obstacle, they were offering a new cryptocurrency, which they called ZPE coin, named for the kind of energy they believed they were harvesting, called zero-point energy. While zero-point energy is a scientific concept in quantum mechanics, it's better known in the public consciousness as a shorthand for a nearly unlimited energy source, sometimes invoked in science fiction settings, with two notable examples being the strategy game Stellaris and the animated Pixar film The Incredibles. They claimed that a pre-sale in January had resulted in over $130,000 in revenue, but it could still be purchased at a 30% discount until the end of April, and once they sold 130,000 tokens, everyone's ZPE coin would be converted into a version which would be traded alongside others such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. Until then, all tokens would be tracked through GAEA's internal servers. However, there was a different kind of token which ZPE coin more closely resembled: shitcoins. Shitcoin is a term used both by supporters and detractors to describe cryptocurrencies with no utility, typically designed as classic pump-and-dump schemes in which the creator and their associates give themselves large amounts of the token, make it available for purchase, inflate the value through social engineering, then rapidly sell their holdings, draining the liquidity pool and disappearing with the majority of the money. ZPE coin, however, distinguished itself by having a hypothetical utility. According to the GAEA website, ZPE coin would be the only way to purchase all of the new infinite energy devices that they were developing, though they also promised a number of other amenities for holding the coin, such as early access to projects and something that they vaguely called experiential retreats. An entire page of the website was dedicated to ZPE coin, which explained that those who purchased the token would be able to use dedicated services in order to exchange their coins for legal tender through their credit card, beginning in May. ZPE coin also had its own website, which included much of the same information alongside a referral program, which promised a 6% kickback for those who managed to convince others to buy the token. These kickbacks would be paid in ZPE coin. A frequently asked questions section included a remarkable claim that ZPE coin would become the center of a new economic system. One question and answer topic read, quote, "What is the difference between ZPE coin and other coins? ZPE coin is underwritten by the receding $60 trillion annual petrodollar economy. ZPE coin is the exclusive method of acquiring GAEA's Infinergy products. You must own ZPE coin to get unlimited power in Infinergy products. As worldwide purchasing power is diverted from the petrol-based economy to our new decentralized consumer-based economy, the intrinsic value of ZPE coin will naturally increase." End quote. To help pitch these new infinite energy devices, multiple animations were made explaining the mission of GAEA and its perceived importance. These were uploaded to the YouTube channel of a phone and internet broker named Telephonet. Of note was an animated version of Nigel, who is referenced as a scientist and inventor working with GAEA. Many of these animations stress the importance of purchasing ZPE coin to aid in their mission.
GAEA supports inventors who produce life-changing technologies and want to see their creations helping people. We love our inventors, even with all their quirks and eccentricities. That's why we've created a path to propel their tech from the garage into people's hands. We also make sure they're paid fairly for life, and they don't have to give up their intellectual property. When you buy ZPE coin, You support the inventors who make our world a better place. Don't you agree it's time to support our inventors who want to help us with their ideas? So join us.
Their website touted 3 different technologies being researched by GAEA's scientists, though it appears their only scientist was Nigel. The first was what they called a quantum power cell, or QPC, which they described as, quote, a simple yet effective zero-point energy device that will change the world forever. This energy industry interrupting technology will revolutionize how we access energy and, best of all, how we won't have to pay for it. End quote. The associated images suggested a device with a battery-shaped housing being used to charge a smartphone. The second device was alleged to be a water purification method which worked, quote, by changing the electromagnetic structure of fluids passing through our devices, and a third was a water pump whose movement could also be used to produce electricity. While these latter 2 would remain vague, the quantum power cell would receive significant attention from GAEA, who published videos from Nigel showing off the device working.
What we got here? Got an LED. An LED, a row of magnets, a row of zinc, a row of bits of paper, and some copper, and a final magnet over there, and an AVO. No trickery, we're on a wooden desk on a wooden floor. There. So what was that? A minute and a half, including faults? Let's see what happens when we put an LED on it. Okay. Don't tell me you can't get it to work. Not rocket science, it's called clever science. It's not voodoo, it's called can do. It's not witchcraft, it's goddamn art. So please do not tell me that this is a battery.
Brother built a lemon battery, so you can actually do this at home. It's not free infinite energy by any stretch. It will deplete. There's actually a very good video on this by Electroboom of how exactly a copper zinc battery works and how it steals the electrons and then moves them through the circuit, and eventually it depletes all the electrons, and then that's just how chemical batteries work. Then your battery is used up, and that's it. In rechargeable batteries, the materials are such that you can replenish the electron charge, but you know, in your standard alkalines and your copper zincs, you can't. The magnets are doing nothing. It's just a copper zinc battery. You can do this with just the copper zinc with no magnets involved. It will not change the output whatsoever. The magnets are just holding it all together in his setup.
These material realities would come to be an insurmountable problem in the production of the quantum power cell. Eventually, both the GAEA and ZPE Coin websites would alter their descriptions of the project, with the status section on the latter reading, quote, "The QPC project was delayed in June 2018 for funding reasons. An issue arose with the wet paper design causing corrosion. GAEA engineers sought a non-corrosive replacement material. No suitable natural material was found, although many were tried. We sought the advice of a nano-engineering expert who quoted about $40,000 to develop a material, but could not guarantee it would work." End quote. This problem with corrosion can be explained by the natural processes of a chemical battery, as definitionally, the material would corrode as electrons were stolen from its component parts. No material would be sufficient to prevent this, as if it did, it would rob the quantum power cell of its only actual method of producing electricity. But by June, Nigel had apparently lost interest in the QPC and had moved on to a new energy-producing invention, the Radiant Power Panel. According to Nigel, this panel consisted of numerous LEDs placed in a tight configuration next to one another, and when he did so, it could not only take power from any light source, but also from what he called alternately scalar waves and background solar radiation. Notably, by this point, he had taken on assistants.
This is Nigel and Andrew from GAEA, What you can see here is a Generation 2 radiant power panel. It was formed from the research we gained on the Generation 1, which was costed off the shelves. This was purposely designed to do one function. That's to take the background stellar radiation that is ambient across the planet and convert it into an energy source which goes along the red and black cable here.
So, what he is doing is using an LED light panel as a bad solar panel. Something that is maybe not a well-known fact is that LEDs, like, they can be used as really bad light detectors because they're effectively really bad solar panels. They produce light at a p-in junction similar to any silicon device. So if you pulled the cap off of like a big power transistor, that also works as a really shitty solar panel. That silicon junction is what a solar panel is. So shining a light at any of those junctions, if they're exposed in such a way that you can, is going to produce a small amount of voltage, even though they aren't laid out to be optimized like an actual like power producing solar panel is.
However, the LED panel was only a part of a larger system. This would be combined with another device that he called a light bridge, which involved connecting numerous LEDs together in a sequence to dramatically increase the voltage of the electricity, which he would use to charge a battery. Despite his excitement, though, Nigel was operating under a severe misconception.
The misconception is people not knowing Ohm's law or like understanding the difference between voltage and power. If you have something that takes 10 watts in and gets 100 watts out, that's a power gain. If you measure that on this mythical device, that would be a power gain, right? But if you have something, you can change voltage as much as you want because it's a balancing act with the current that it's capable of supplying. The main misunderstanding here, and like the thing that ties this all together, is your power equation, which is power equals P equals IV, I being current, V equals voltage. That will maintain the same no matter what. 5 volt at 1 amp is 5 watts. 10,000 volts at 0.5 milliamps is also 5 watts. You haven't gained any power. Someone DM'd me and said, I've invented this free power device that I think you can make. You're the only one that could pull it off. And their idea was basically take a 12 volt motor and hook it to a 120 volt generator, and you're gonna get free power because the voltage is more. But it would just convert it to a lower current, higher voltage type. And that's something that people get twisted a lot.
In order to show that it worked, he used a drill plugged into a battery that the panel had been charging.
Like so. And if we now drill a hole. Oh, we drilled a few holes. Does that prove a point?
After quietly removing the water pump inventions from the websites, they began touting yet another invention from Nigel. The electromagnetic inverter, a device that appears identical to the electromagnetic intensifier that he had shared 2 years earlier on his YouTube channel, claiming that they were, quote, designed to provide unlimited electricity required for commercial and industrial applications requiring high AC voltages. The page for the EMI on the ZPE Coin website touted that they believe the value of this technology to be $50 trillion, though how they arrived at this number isn't detailed. However, they were reticent to share too much information on it, writing that, quote, the EMI technology are being closely held due to its enormous power generation potential. The application of EMI installations must be closely vetted and monitored for beneficial uses only. End quote. By this point, however, it was becoming clear that not enough tokens have been sold to reach the milestone that would allow holders of ZPE coin to trade their tokens on a blockchain, and no update on such had been made. This, however, was likely a blessing in disguise. In a July vulnerability report made by the American Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, hundreds of Ethereum tokens were identified as having a similar integer overflow vulnerability, which would allow the creators of the token to set the value of ZPE coin in anyone's wallet to any number, as high or as low as they wished, largely defeating any advantage that blockchain technology might have offered. However, if any of this concerned Nigel, he made no show of it, as he continued to record videos for the Telefonet YouTube channel, including the lecture that would garner him the most attention, 1 + 1 = 1 the video, alien emoji. By this point, he had come to believe that the Royal Navy was ultimately the cause of him losing his daughter. In another of these videos, he clarifies that he wasn't working for GAEA, but rather he was volunteering for them, a technicality that he hoped would help him avoid taxation.
I work for a company called GAEA. Well, I don't actually work. I give all my services free of charge. That's so Mr. Taxman can't come and fuck me. I don't work for money. I work for the greater good of humanity. I give all of my time, all of my expertise and knowledge for free, for the greater good of humanity. GAEA, in their benevolence, have hosted a website. They have hosted the costs of the equipment. They do so in a benevolent manner, as a gift to humanity. The taxman can't charge benevolence.
Nigel's claim that he wasn't working for money was perhaps contradicted by GAEA's earnings and expenses report released early the following year. While GAEA fell significantly short of their funding goals through ZPE coin, they still declared their funding round a success, writing, quote, "In 2018, GAEA sponsored a scientific team who discovered several methods of capturing raw ionic energy from the cosmos, thereby confirming its existence. That was step 1. We also made great headway learning to convert this raw cosmic energy into a form humans can use, AC electricity." End quote. They were extremely optimistic about the coin's future, writing, quote, "ZPE coin is guaranteed to increase 80% from $5 to $8 during 2019. Depending on performances, it might even double to $10 beginning in 2020. End quote. In another slide, they stated that April of 2019 would bring with it remarkable progress in its technologies. A later slide shows raw numbers. They claim that their total income, generated from the sale of ZPE coin, totaled $154,418.80. Approximately $40,000 of that total was listed as going directly to Nigel, with a further $24,000 going to assistant engineers and yet another nearly $25,000 going toward what they labeled various vendors for materials, tools, software, and services. A large portion of this money also went to administrative expenses, though the expertise and duties of those receiving the money went unspecified. And then, quite suddenly, GAEA would go completely silent. As the months passed with no updates, those hopeful for Nigel's inventions began leaving comments underneath GAEA's videos on the Telefonet YouTube channel, some hoping to make contact with Nigel to either acquire or assist in creating the inventions that would revolutionize the field of energy production and, by extension, dramatically advance human civilization. A comment from user Reiki Master WSB indicates that, by 16 months after their last video, the GAEA website was offline. Some of these hopeful parties would receive a reply over a year later from Greg Ottensmeyer, president of Telefonet and also listed as the president of GAEA on their annual report. Replying to one commenter, Ottensmeyer wrote unflatteringly of Nigel, quote, "Nigel abandoned the project in December 2019 after his extortion demand for $35,000 was not met. He has refused to communicate since that time. Unfortunately, I believe he took it as far as he could go and ultimately realized he could not achieve the promises he made. There is no other reasonable conclusion." End quote. In reply to another user asking about acquiring the red and blue boxes seen in Nigel's videos with the radiant power panel, Ottensmeyer explained that, quote, "The red and blue boxes are not available because they were considered proprietary property of Dr. Nigel Cheese. However, I can tell you they were composed of breadboards with LED bulbs and a few other diodes. I wish I could help you more, but Cheese abandoned the project midstream and broke his promise to deliver working units after being paid thousands of dollars. Good luck." End quote. He also explained that GAEA was no longer accepting donations, though they were planning on reactivating their website. But by this point, Ottensmeyer had already moved on to other fringe beliefs and interests, making a post about the Akashic records to his LinkedIn page in December of 2019. GAEA would post one final video from Nigel 2 years and 8 months after their first and only annual report, though Nigel's displeasure with GAEA was obvious. A disclaimer at the beginning distanced the group from Nigel's rhetoric, stating that, quote, "The content contained in the videos published on GAEA's channels are strictly the theories, opinions, and representations of the author only. Parental guidance is suggested as some language may not be suitable for children." End quote. In this video, Nigel presents what appears to be his light bridge, a multimeter, and a clothing iron, which he refers to as a
fucking big thing. Now, if I can make them LEDs light up, it means I have a circuit through this. So I've got plugged off here. This is just for you, okay? So when I do that, I've got a circuit, and I've got 1/3 of an amp. How does that sound? So it works, and it means with the correct engineering assistance, we can power any device. There's no drop in voltage, none whatsoever. Okay? So those in GAEA who have been scratching their heads saying, what the fuck? And should we really release any money to this technology? And no, we won't invest, we'll just keep you singing until you produce a couple of thousand gigawatts of power. We'll make you starve and suffer, we won't give you any money. But we'll just take everybody's money off them, but we'll tell them we're investing it, and we won't really pay the people who need the money to do the work. So as you can gather, I'm a little bit pissed off with people in GAEA who are withholding the funds. Okay?
However, it appears that by this point, GAEA had mostly disbanded, and only a few pages relating to ZPE coin remain online. As of the writing of this video, both the GAEA website and the ZPE coin website remain a blank white page. But while GAEA would fold, Nigel would persist, albeit in a limited fashion. He continued his search for energy-producing devices with another unit that he appears to have invented in 2021, which he named PCAMS, alongside a team of unnamed engineers.
This is PCAMS. I wrote this presentation as an investor brief, and I've given this brief to many people over the last month or so.
This device, much like his electromagnetic intensifier, would purportedly multiply any electrical energy that he sent through it. Unlike his other devices, which he claimed were harvesting untapped energy, he seemed to be claiming that this device created completely new energy from nothing.
We put it together, and they constructed a device, and they put in 5 watts of energy on one side and got 28.8 on the other. Now, when I went to school, 28 is bigger than 5, which means we got out more than we put in. Therefore, the laws of entropy, you can't have something for free and you can't have more out than you put in, are a total lie. That means the whole construct of the thermodynamics principles, which has driven this world for at least the last 200 years, was built on falsity. It was a rabbit hole.
The vast majority of this presentation was dedicated to discussing how useful such a device would be. Towards the end, he encourages the viewer to internalize what he's said, warning that humanity faces doom if they do not adopt and invest in his technologies.
So there is the brilliance in PCAMs. And please, it's the last time for humanity. The very, very last time it's being offered. You choose the wrong one now, and your species will be dead within 30 years. I kid you not, each and every one of you. You waste this opportunity, and your children will be cursing you until the day they die. So why don't you take this opportunity to get a copy of this video, sit down, watch it 2 or 3 times as a goddamn adult, learn the words in it and the phrases, sit down with your children and explain to them what you are going to do for their future. Then ask your child what they would like for Christmas. Think about it. I'm doing my best to get this to you, but I'm being blocked every possible direction and stopping me getting this to you. So I'm hoping that for my Christmas present, a few million people get to see this.
And indeed, people would find his video, but not in the way that he intended. Early the following year, YouTube user PlanerWalk would find Nigel's 1 + 1 = 1 video and take the time to argue against and poke fun at the various claims that he made, while also implying that there was significantly more than would be contained in this single video.
But I will be making another video on Nigel Cheese's more pernicious aspects in the future, because there's actually a surprisingly large rabbit hole when it comes to Nigel Cheese.
Indeed. PlanerWalk would see fit to make multiple further videos about Nigel over multiple years, completely covering the 1 + 1 = 1 video and critiquing further videos. Another debunking style YouTuber, Sciman Dan, would do the same. These videos from both YouTubers would accrue viewership in the hundreds of thousands, ranking them as some of the most popular on their respective channels and becoming the primary vehicles by which people would discover Nigel Cheese. However, finding any further information for curious parties would prove to be significantly more difficult, as much of what Nigel had shared online had been removed, with scarce little remaining. Links to his videos in other places often led to removal notices. Some of his videos have managed to survive due in part to the fringe science community's habit of downloading and re-uploading videos and documents from one another, ostensibly to assist in their visibility. But by the time the debunkers had found Nigel, it appeared that he had largely retreated from any presence online. The last sign of him was on the custom website iondio.com, which sported the words "Future Assistant" in the top left corner. The main page of the website declared, "Your future, light, space, and time are no longer constants before humanity." An unattributed statement below reads, quote, "Once in the history of mankind comes an opportunity to correct all the wrongs of its past without castigation towards another. To seek retribution for those deeds done makes humanity no better than those who have gone before you. As humanity, you have within yourself the capacity needed to rise above such actions and display to all your ability to not only move forward in who you are, but forgive the wrongs of the past." End quote. Advancing his field of study beyond electrical engineering and physics, he was now claiming advanced knowledge in nutrition and was offering what he called a personal dietary assistant, apparently a phone application, though what precisely it did wasn't made obvious. Somehow, a personal consultation would be involved. The main page also made mention of a digital security method called Guardian. This website appears to have been made in 2019, but in 2024 it underwent partial renovation to focus much more on his PCAMs unit. Shortly after this, however, it reverted to a version that is copyrighted to 2014, though it's likely that this is a typo, given that the website includes a page dedicated to PCAMs, which he had not mentioned until much later in any available surviving pages or documents. The website today includes a page for a digital encryption method labeled as three-way ramp encryption, though it's unclear whether or not this is distinct from the aforementioned Guardian, as Guardian has its own page on the website, left blank except for the site's universal page formatting. Also included is what he called a relatively self-explanatory universal user identification. In the About Us page, Jamie Panarello's name appears, one of the engineers who had worked with Nigel during and before his time at GAEA. The PCAMs page hosted only the words, Chapter 1, Magnetism, Did You Know? And an embedded video hosted on the website Vimeo which offered, quote, My final gift before I leave. This video was a slideshow including numerous mathematical proofs for his theories, as well as aspects of his core life philosophies which he had touted online for the past decade. His voice was totally absent, replaced by a repeating instrumental track. Of note is the way he uses 22 divided by 7 as the precise value of pi. 22 divided by 7 is sometimes used as a general approximation of pi for no more than 3 significant figures, but Nigel uses it to extrapolate pi out to 16 significant figures, arriving at a number far different from the traditionally used definition. By this point, he had also subsumed theories about the Great Pyramid of Giza, combining it with his own theories to declare that, quote, Giza was constructed using an exacting ratio of 11 divided by 7 or pi divided by 2 or 1.57142857. This unique value enables the pyramid construct to be exactly 1/6 of a cube. End quote. This is an extension of other fringe beliefs about the Great Pyramid, which state that certain aspects of its geometry are somehow scientifically significant, usually used to justify ancient alien theories or pronouncements that the architects of the pyramid had some sort of esoteric knowledge. In this video, he claims that both he and the ancient Egyptians had discovered the same scientific ideas, writing that, quote, From a mathematical perspective, Giza, for want of a phrase, is both mathematically and geometrically perfect, and that it displays celestial accuracy beyond a value of human comprehension. Every calculation is perfect, all bound within a single 3D object. End quote. The final minute of the video displays a single slide, declaring that this was his gift to humanity. At the bottom, a short paragraph reads, quote, I also thank all those who have helped me along my journey. My time amongst you is limited and now drawing to an end. Help me to help you all. Stop the evilness of war, greed, and lust for power, and I will offer you your future. End quote. Today, Nigel still occasionally attracts the attention of fringe science enthusiasts who believe in his dream of free, unlimited energy, and they are often excited by the fact that they are able to recreate some of his experiments, especially the battery-shaped quantum power cell. However, his theories are often disregarded in favor of other personalities eagerly sharing their own fringe ideas, with claims that Nigel's ideas were only partially correct and that these new thinkers have more complete answers, a cycle that repeats itself endlessly. Some of these people managed to retain Nigel's lost papers and posts, sharing them with one another and re-uploading his videos in order to archive them in case some nefarious power were to attempt to silence Nigel. However, much of what he has written is now lost, and what still exists continues to erode away from the internet, clearing a way for other personalities stating their own theories to begin the cycle anew. Thank you to the game Starsector for sponsoring this video. Having played for hundreds of hours at this point, Starsector is a game that I can happily endorse. Made by a team whose number can be counted on one hand over the past decade, Starsector is a single-player space sandbox game with no microtransactions, no loot boxes, and no season passes. Just $15 for a deep and rich game that is still one of the most accessible in the genre, available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. I could sit here and describe the mechanics and the breadth of content, but after extensive deliberation, the conclusion to which I came was that the best way to describe it is to show it. So, I booted up Starsector, started a fresh campaign, and played for about 5 hours. Here's a brief summary. Starting as an explorer, I took a look at the contract listings, but what interested me more was a pirate in a bar selling information on where to find a valuable blueprint. I accepted a few easy scanning contracts in the vicinity of my target, figuring that I could make some easy money along the way, and after fending off a small fleet of pirates, my confidence was high, and I set off. At my first stop, I discovered a Tempest-class frigate in rough but serviceable condition, and a blueprint worth even more than the one I was hunting. My next stop, however, was where I struck gold. 2 14th Battle Group antique ships. They were in a sorry state, but I knew how to take advantage of my find. I would become a bounty hunter with this 14th Battle Group Eagle as my centerpiece. But with these ships, I no longer had enough fuel to make it home, a problem compounded by even more ships I found that I refused to leave behind. Running through hyperspace like a dog with an overlarge stick, I began scrounging for any fuel I could find, blasting apart the still functional defenses around Domain-era probes and installations. I only barely clawed my way home after a few questionable fights. You okay, little guy? I took the time to outfit my new fleet and took my first proper bounty, a pirate base harassing one of the core systems. I'll let the fight speak for itself. The pay was decent, but I had looted something a bit more exciting from the pirate base. I was wrapping up for the day, but I couldn't help but take the time to test out my shiny new toy in a battle simulation. Game's good. Link to it in the description.
Because when you play with a magnet and you understand a magnet, and you understand that the magnetic fields, there isn't 2, north and south, there's 4. So if we take our 4 magnetic fields and we'll have, shall we say, there's the first one, like that, as a north. Obviously it goes in the loop. And we've got one there as the south. And the red comes off on a loop, as we know, like that. And the blue comes off on a loop, like that. That's the first failure. That's because it's a round object. So I'll just do it the other way as long as you can see it. We've got 4 magnetic fields. 2 that you play with, which is north and south, and 2 that you didn't even know existed. The 2 in the middle are known as the magnetotoroidal field. It's a Doppler field. It goes like this, so sometimes you see it towards you, sometimes you don't, like that. The Doppler effect of the fire engine and the train whistle going past when it changes in frequency, meow. Yeah, that shift in frequency is called Doppler, and it occurs here all the time. Well, because I know that there's actually 4 magnetic fields, I thought, well, can we actually extract anything out of these 4 fields? Can we now utilise the fact that there are 4 fields? And I went on to demonstrate. This was all recorded on a video, by the way, that the Royal Navy's got. I actually assembled 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I put 10 magnets on there, and some professor put his hand, I don't know who he was. But why are you using 10? And I said, well, you've only got 10 fingers. I doubt if you can actually count any higher right now. That was a perfect insult to upset everybody in the theatre. But they looked, okay, what's he doing? Well, if we got 10 magnets like that, north and south, all glued together, we've got a north here and a south here. And if we apply the 1 plus 1, we've got 1 plus 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 1 equals 1 magnet. They did not like that. I don't care. They wanted to know what I'd done. So I done that. I said, well, what you now have to do is kind of use a word called extrapolate, which is to make things and extend them out. So I said, well, okay, if we now consider this as a length, if this was 10 millimeters, and 10 and 10 and 10 and 10 and 10, we'd have